Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Authors at Google event. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce Mike Kim, the author of Escaping North Korea, which I think is especially relevant today given the detainment of Yuna Lee and Laura Ling in North Korea currently. And Mike is also the founder of the NGO Crossing Borders, which testified in a congressional hearing on the topic of combating human trafficking in China. And he's even spent some time in North Korea and was able to, which was the basis for his book, he was able to get a glimpse into the lives of ordinary North Koreans. And I believe it was the first book of its kind to do so. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mike to Google. And just a couple of housekeeping measures. For the Q&A portion of the talk, if you guys could speak into the microphone right there for our VC, or for our remote offices and our YouTube audience, that would be great. And so I'd like to introduce Mike.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here at Mountain View with you guys. I'd like to thank you for taking the time. Thank you for taking the time to come out. I'd like to thank the Authors at Google team, as well as Erica, for the hard work in organizing this event. I just got back from a 3-country Asia tour yesterday, so a little bit jet lagged. I feel good, though, but you'll have to forgive me if my mind's a little bit slower today. But when I spoke, while there, I spoke at the Korea office and as well the Japan Google office. The Google office is there. Had great time in Korea. Had such a good time. I ended up going back, reconnecting with them for lunch to have another follow-up meeting. So it's great to be here with you today. Looking forward to interacting with you as well. I guess the plan is I'll just share for about 30 minutes my story, and then we'll have some time to interact. Usually my favorite time is the dialogue afterwards to talk through any questions and anything on your mind. So I'll just be sharing about my story. I've been traveling and telling people about North Korea and the feedback. I've spoken to all different types of groups. I've done universities, Harvard, Oxford. I've done think tanks in DC, as well as the U.S. State Department wanting to hear some of my story, and the media. I don't know if Erica sent out the leak last week. There was Anderson Cooper, and just different groups interested. Actually, I just got a text now for any Jon Stewart fans. On Tuesday will be The Daily Show, so flying into New York for that. Probably my biggest one. Yeah, a little bit nervous about that one, but I heard they just announced it on the website, or my friend just texted me, said they'd announced it. I don't know where. On Tuesday. So all these groups are inviting me to share my story, and the feedback I've gotten is that I'm providing the human element to everything going on in North Korea. You hear about the nuclear launch, you hear about the missile test, you hear about the detained journalists, and I'm providing this human element for people to get their arms around everything going on in North Korea, to understand the mindset, the propaganda, some of the human rights issues, and that'll be what I'll be sharing about today. This is a picture of me at the China-North Korea border. This is the Tumen River. On the right side, the Tumen River that divides the two countries. On the right side is North Korea. On the left side is China. And this is an area I visited. This is my home for 4 years. I was about 30 minutes from here, more inland in China. But I visited here anywhere from 2 to 4 times a month. This is the river that refugees cross, North Koreans cross when they escape into China. And I've gone, we would go for picnics here. We'd take our donors here to visit. I've even gone swimming in this river. And so it's been a subject of interest for the media, now with Laura and Yuna detained in North Korea, in one of these areas. That was a topic of my Anderson Cooper interview is, what's the border like there? And so this was my home for 4 years. While there, I interviewed hundreds of North Koreans. And I would just ask them questions into the night. We'd light a candle. We'd talk for hours about, what do you eat? What does the government tell you? What's the propaganda like? What are the prisons like? And I just write notes. And I journal every day for hours. And that became the substance of this book, Escaping North Korea, that I just organized topically. So there's a chapter on the famine, a chapter on sex trafficking. And what I'll just do in this talk is just walk you through a few of my chapters, and then again after that we'll have a little dialogue. I'll be reading 2 excerpts from my book, one at the beginning and then one at the end. And here is an opening paragraph from my introduction. In In November 2004, I was in northern Laos, standing in the back of a truck with 6 angry soldiers pointing their AK-47s at me. This is a journey from China into Laos, helping two North Korean women get to safety. I was leading 2 North Korean refugee women through the 6,000-mile modern-day underground railroad that begins in North Korea and runs through China and Southeast Asia. We hoped to gain asylum for them in South Korea. We had just illegally crossed the border from southern China into Laos and had been captured by Border Patrol soldiers. As I stood there with my hands in the air, I thought to myself, how in the world did I ever get myself into this? It seems like another world when I was there in limbo between China and Laos, AK-47s pointed at me, and thinking to myself, how in the world did I ever get to this point? You know, I used to once have a normal life. And to answer that question, I'd have to take you back to July 2001. And at that point, I was based in Chicago, had my own financial planning business. Clientele was increasing. 2001, I was 24 at the time, so you can begin to do the math. When I was in the Korea office, they told me afterwards, they said, when you speak to a Korean office, you have to tell them your age up front or else people don't listen to the rest of your talk. I was 24 at the time, and clientele was increasing. I was awarded for the most revenue generation in the office that month. So it was looking good. Had hired my own personal assistant, and I asked her to clear my calendar for 2 weeks because I wanted to travel to China. I traveled to China. I was in the Northeast area, and there I met a North Korean refugee. I was playing with this little girl, and one woman said, hey, Mike, the girl you've been playing with all this time, she's a North Korean refugee. And my response was, what's a North Korean refugee? I had no idea why North Koreans were in China, and back at that time, there was not much awareness on the subject. So she went on to tell me about the famine, about the oppression, about the religious persecution, about the sex trafficking of women, and I went on to learn about it. I met other teenagers, 16 to 18-year-old girls sold to 57-year-old Chinese farmers there that paid the highest price for them. And I returned to the States just deeply moved by that experience. And I'm a Korean American born and raised in the States, but I had never heard about this situation going on, and it just blew me away. So I returned, and I distinctly remember sitting across from clients talking about mutual funds and investing, retirement planning, and feeling really disengaged from it all, and just an overwhelming sense that I had to do something. And I decided that, just when I'm young, able to take some risk, I wanted to do something like this once in my life. So I tell people it's like a Peace Corps, a U.S. Peace Corps type of experience where I wanted to devote a few years of my life. So I decided I'm going to make the move to the border, and I called my mom to tell her the good news. And of course, my mom, yelled on the phone and like never before for about 10 minutes. And then for the first time in my life, she hung up the phone on me. Long story short, she came around eventually to become one of my biggest supporters, and it took a while, understandably. But initially she gave me, everything, the guilt trip, and you're our oldest child, and we didn't immigrate from Korea, so you could throw away your life doing something like this. And eventually she turned around to become one of my biggest supporters. So I bought a one-way ticket to China, New Year's Day, 2003. I bought a one-way ticket, 2 duffel bags, and I made the move over there. And 2 challenges. One was I didn't speak Korean that well. We grew up speaking English at home, so my Korean was not very good. I had to learn the language. So while there, I picked up Korean at the border through the North Koreans. So I picked up, people tell me, the North Korean dialect when I was there. The second issue was it's hard to live in this area without raising suspicion as an American, as a foreigner. So I had to have a reason for being there. I researched some business possibilities. In the end, found out that the best possibility, maybe the most credible, the best cover for me could be that I'm here as a student of the North Korean style of Taekwondo. Now, North Korea, one of its exports is its style of Taekwondo, which North Korea says is superior to the South Korean style. They have 70 schools around the world where they're promoting their brand. And this area, they had one school. And I had, dabbled in martial arts before, not much. I loved sports growing up, so this would be fun. I'll just train for 4 years. And I convinced them that this is why I'm here. I'm here to learn the North Korean style of Taekwondo. I can't learn in many places from North Korean masters. So the cool thing was I got to train in North Korean Taekwondo. And the thing that really sucked is that I had to train in North Korean Taekwondo. It was, these guys would do 2-a-day training sessions from anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. I would train once a day. In the winter, no heat. I'm really unflexible. I can't touch my toes. The sit and reach, I could never touch the end of the thing. And they made me do the splits, like my masters, rip my legs apart. And I trained pretty hard. And I found out a little bit too late that a lot of these guys were training for the Olympics. So I got beat up pretty bad. But anyway, that was my cover. I'd wake up in the morning, I got to show my face. It's my office hours. Ended up getting, my second-degree black belt there from the North Korean masters. So I'll just walk you through a few of my chapters of the book. This is chapter 8. Chapters 8 and 9, I talk about the Underground Railroad. Still largely unknown today. There's a 6,000-mile modern-day underground railroad in Asia. It runs from Pyongyang to Bangkok, Thailand. So it runs through China, from North Korea, through China, into the Southeast Asian countries, eventually to Bangkok, Thailand. And this is the railroad that we operated on to help North Koreans get to safety. It largely resembles a civil war, the Underground Railroad used to help North Korean refugees get to safety in the north. So one of my first projects I engaged in was to help 4 teenagers get to safety along this Underground Railroad. And there's 2 methods. In the next slide, I'll talk about one of the methods. This one was to get them into a foreign embassy or consulate in China. So the name of the game is if you can get them safely in to a foreign embassy or consulate that's sympathetic to the North Koreans, they can be flown to South Korea and be granted their freedom, be given refugee status in South Korea. For those that have read the Da Vinci Code will remember the scene when they're running from the police and consider going to the U.S. Embassy. And once you're on that ground, you're on sovereign ground and you're safe. That's pretty much the idea here. Here you see a picture, which is a cover of my book, and you see North Koreans trying to get into the Japanese consulate in Shenyang, China, in northeast China, and you see Chinese guards tackling this mother. If you can make it in safely, then you'll make it to South Korea. If not, you'll be sent. If you're tackled by Chinese guards, if you're captured, you'll be sent back to North Korea, and you'll be imprisoned, punished for treason, tortured, and in some cases executed. So the project was to help 4 teenagers get into the British consulate in Shanghai. And, again, long story. In the book, I go into much more detail. I researched the route thoroughly, and eventually we decided that this is the best bet. We took the journey from northeast China by train to Shanghai, China. And when we arrived, one of the things I talk about in the book is I refer to these 4 teenagers as child warriors. They were clearly warriors. They've endured what the UN has labeled the worst modern-day famine. Some of them were survivors of prison camps in North Korea, where the 2 journalists have been sentenced to 12 years of hard labor. They've, some of them have been sex trafficked, sold, escaped. They're clearly warriors. No one would doubt that. But they're also clearly children. On the train ride into Shanghai, I remember they were playing games on my cell phone and laughing. It felt like a slumber party, then hanging out all night, staying up. And when we got into Shanghai, I asked them, last meal before we go into the British consulate, what do you want to eat? They said, whatever you want, Teacher Kim. In the Korean culture, teacher is a respectful way to address somebody. And I said, have you guys ever had McDonald's before? And they said, no, we never had. Only the oldest of the group had heard of McDonald's before. And I said, oh, you've got to experience McDonald's before you go in. So, it was like 7 a.m. when the train had arrived. I said, let's head over to the McDonald's in downtown. And we drove over, and we must have arrived around 8 o'clock or something in the morning. There's a line out the door in China, 8 o'clock in the morning. At the McDonald's. And I didn't know this, but at that time, China only had no breakfast menu at the McDonald's. So we started off our day with Big Macs, fries, Cokes, and sundaes. And we're in this McDonald's, and I'm reviewing the game plan with him. I got diagrams and everything, and I'm doing this in Korean, trusting no one around us can understand. And the youngest of the group, he was also the biggest. In the book, I call him Duho. He was clearly distracted by his first Big Mac experience. And I knew he wasn't paying attention, so I stopped and said, Duho, what did I just say right now? And he grinned sheepishly. He knew he had been caught. And the other three slapped him on the head and said, pay attention, this is really important stuff. And in the book, I tell that story because I think it's a really telling moment. Here I am reviewing a life and death game plan, and this kid's distracted by a Big Mac, not paying attention. And I talk about this tension between the child and the warrior. And I remember being so upset at that moment, thinking, no child, no teenager should have to go through this. Should have to make a choice between life and death and risk it all for freedom. Well, anyway, we made the journey into the British consulate. I had pushed them in. We made the walk over together. They made it safely, and I made my escape. Reuters reported that they safely went in. The rest of this article said that that place was surrounded by 30 uniformed police officers within minutes. I had to flee, make my escape, and our goal was to get them to the United States. Here you see a quote by Senator Brownback asking saying that they should be able to come to the U.S. July 4th of all days is the day that they made it in and that they were given their freedom. And shortly after they had gotten in, I got a call from a government contact in Beijing saying, Mike, I've heard some stuff. The Chinese PSB, their FBI, they have footage of you from the embassy, the consulate building. They have your picture. They're looking for you. Get out of the country. Don't come back until I tell you to return. So then I fled the country for a few months, returned later. Returned later again and said, I'm never doing that again. I didn't sign up for, I came to feed North Koreans and not really sign up for this kind of work. Well, I met two North Korean women, Mrs. Lee, Miss Kim. They told me of their plight and said they wanted to go to South Korea. And I, once again, deeply moved by their story, wanted to help them get there to Seoul. I researched embassies and consulates again, and everyone said it's a dangerous route right now. It's dangerous. Chinese police, they know what's going on. They've heightened security. It's not a good idea. So the other route was to take the full 6,000 miles into Southeast Asia. And you see this little line I drew from North Korea through China into southern China. Then you go through one of the Southeast Asian countries. You take your pick, Burma, Laos, Vietnam. And then from there, you go to the Mekong River. We went in through Laos. You go over to the Mekong River on the west side, take that down to the Golden Triangle, where the three countries meet. And then once you're into Bangkok, Thailand, they can go into the South Korean embassy there. And once they get in there, they're safe. They're given refugee status. First question to make sure they're not spies. And then they're flown to Seoul, Korea, where they, for the first time, have freedom. You got to go to Thailand because none of the other countries will send them to South Korea. They'll send them to North Korea. So we embarked on this journey, I won't go into all the details I usually do in my presentation, but we went through northern China into southern China. The whole journey took probably a couple of weeks. Of course, I researched this whole thing extenuously myself, and we were in limbo between China and Laos. And I remember being in between the two countries and a tribal guy approaching me. So, this is a very mountainous region. There's a lot of tribes, various tribes in the mountains. And I remember a tribal guy approaching me. He had an axe. He looked the part. He, real leathery skin. His, had a lot of teeth missing and was wearing certain jewelry, ragged clothes. And he approached me and he offered me something to smoke, to sell me something to smoke. And it was at that moment I recalled signs back in Laos when I was testing out the journey that said, don't buy opium, don't support the local drug trade. This was in English, geared towards foreigners. And the first thought that came across my mind was, this is pretty cool. I've never done anything like this before. And then, of course, second thought was I was just deeply pleased by the thought that we were redeeming these drug trafficking routes to free sex trafficking victims. So we continued on this journey into Laos, in limbo. Mrs. Lee was sick with tuberculosis. We found out later that she would have died within 2 weeks if she didn't get proper medical help. She was an illegal refugee in China, so she couldn't get proper medical help. And very sick, deathly sick. We learned that she would have died within 2 weeks, very weak lungs. Ms. Kim was a victim of sex trafficking, which is a topic I'll talk on the next slide. And we were in limbo between the two countries, and she collapsed and said, "Teacher Kim, I've tried to come this far, and I've tried. I can't go on anymore. And take Miss Kim to safety, and I'll die here in the mountains. I've tried my best. I can't go on any further." And I remember not knowing what to say at the time. I had never done anything like this before. Put my hand on her shoulder, said, "You're not going to die here. We'll carry you if we have to." With all the intensity I could muster up, I said, "We're going to make it into Bangkok, Thailand together." And it seems like a miracle. I still don't know how she did it. We took a lot more breaks, a lot more water breaks, and we eventually made it into Bangkok, Thailand. She made it into the South Korean embassy, and they're now in South Korea. I write here how to save a life because that was the work that we were involved in doing, highly rewarding. How do we save these North Korean lives? This awful situation going on at the border that still not much awareness. I've made it my mission to let people know what's going on, how to save a life, the popular song, I wrote that on there. But also that spins off another question, which is how do you deal with saving these lives and the gratitude? Mrs. Lee, to this day, she'll tell me, "Teacher Kim, thank you. I owe you my life." And when I call her in Seoul, Korea, I will call her and her husband now there, and she'll pick up the phone, and when I tell her it's me, first thing she'll do is she'll scream, "Teacher Kim," in excitement, and then she'll break down crying, probably for about a minute or two, and then she'll say, "Thank you, I owe you my life." And I still don't know how I feel about this woman crying every time I call her on the phone. Hopefully it's not a pattern in my life I'm developing. But she'll break down and say, I owe you my life. And some people might like that gratitude. I really don't. It's very awkward. It's very uncomfortable for me. But that's been another issue we deal with is saving these lives and then, afterwards. What do you do after you save these lives? So after this, our organization, Crossing Borders, we really did have a policy change. We said, we're going to focus on helping refugees live safely in China or return to North Korea. I had observed that everybody doing this type of illegal border crossing or embassy consulate work was detained within a year and deported or imprisoned in China. So I said, we want to have a longer-term vision, longer-term perspective. So we had a policy change and said, we'll leave that important work to other organizations and we'll focus on China or returning to North Korea. So one of the things we really began to focus on is sex trafficking. Huge problem going on, again, largely unknown. Here you see a picture of Yuli, I call her in the book. Here, looking at a sheet of paper where she was diagnosed in cancer. This is in China, in one of our shelters. She was a victim of sex trafficking. China, because of the one-child policy, families limited to one child, parents, there's a shortage of women in the country, so parents will abort over and over again until they successfully have a baby boy. And of course, because of that, a lack of men in the country. One UN working study put out a report that said by 2015 to 2030, there will be 25 million Chinese men who are not able to find a wife, a spouse. So huge problem. It's going to be statistically impossible for Chinese men to find wives. So in the Northeast, they're pulling from North Korea. And there's two ways this happens. A North Korean woman will go into China in search for food, freedom, money, medical help, and they'll be abducted by the sex trafficking ring and sold to the highest paying Chinese man. Or a Chinese man will go into North Korea, usually working in conjunction with North Korean businessmen. They'll make a pitch to a family saying, we've got an excellent job for your daughter across the river in a nearby factory. She's going to be making X amount of dollars, be able to send money back to help out your family. Of course, they enthusiastically agree, and they cross into China, and she's sold. And it's often in a market type of setting. You see Yuli's experience on the top. She says, he signaled 8 with his hands as my price for 8,000 RMB. He bargained down from 10,000 RMB. The man seemed happy with the price. And the women are brought out in front. They dress nicely, put on makeup. They adjust their age, and the bidding begins, and the highest bidder wins. It's oftentimes people of lower economic status, usually farmers, people that are disabled or have mental impairments that can't get married. So these are the type of men that these women are oftentimes sold to. And sadly, abuse and rape go hand in hand with sex trafficking. So these women are abused. They're raped by the traffickers, and they're again raped by the men that they're sold to. Here, Yuli tells of her experience in the home she was sold to. He had a mental impairment. When I refused to sleep with him, he hit me. His mother and sister also hit me. I'd rather die than sleep with him, and fought with the family for 7 months. I received severe beatings. I had a bloody nose, ears, and swollen head. I cried every night. This is going on as we speak. It's becoming a growing topic of concern, the North Korean trafficking situation that, again, not a lot of people are aware of. We're trying to make this a subject, one of the main subjects of my conversation with John Stewart on Tuesday. More people, my hope is more people will be aware and decide to get involved or help out or raise awareness on this issue. Yuli died February 2007 of cancer. A huge problem is the people that come out from North Korea are deathly sick. The NGOs don't have budgets to pay for to take care of cancer or a lot of cases of tuberculosis, which is one of the most common diseases in North Korea. I guess I'll tell this last story of one of our staff members. Pastor Kim is a Chinese man. Korean Chinese, so ethnically Korean, but a Chinese citizen born and raised in China. Like the Underground Railroad during the Civil War, a lot of this is made up of Christians, churches, these type of networks, and ours as well. Pastor Kim was one of our staff overseeing shelters of women that were sex trafficked. He oversaw Miss Kim on the previous slide. He oversaw. Took care of her, and we found out later that she was sold to a gangster in China. He was part of a gang. He tracked down Pastor Kim. He had met him before. Tracked him down with a couple of his buddies. They took him to the third floor of an apartment, tied him down to a chair, slapped him around, beat him up, and said, "Where's my wife, my quote-unquote wife?" And he said, "I'm not going to tell you that information." And then they said, "Then tell us where this teacher Kim guy is. We've heard of him." He said, "I'm not going to give you that information." They went outside, and he overheard them whispering outside the door, "Let's just kill him. He's not cooperating, and we'll get rid of his body." He jumped from the third floor of the apartment. He frantically untied himself, jumped from the third floor of the apartment, sprained both of his ankles upon landing, and sprinted for the nearest taxi. And they heard him, were running down the stairs, chasing him. I've sprained my ankles playing basketball. I can't imagine, how painful that is. He sprinted for the nearest taxi, told the taxi to get away as quickly as possible, called me, and said, "Teacher Kim, I need to meet you at, this shelter." We met there. I remember walking in and seeing him with ice bags around his ankles, and his face, beaten up, bloodied. And he told me of everything that had happened. And I told him, I said, "You've been through a traumatic experience. Why don't you take a break from this work?" And he said, "No, I've committed my life to helping the North Koreans, and please don't take me off this assignment. I want to continue helping the North Koreans." Chapter 10 of my book, I believe, is titled Heroes, and I talk about the heroic Chinese people risking their lives for this type of work. So again, sex trafficking, major issue going on at the border, largely unknown. We're trying to bring more attention. A lot of people know about Southeast Asia. We're trying to bring more attention to the horrible things going on at the China-North Korea border. And this is the final chapter that I'll walk through with you. Chapter 6, I talk about the gulags. Again, was the conversation topic of my interview with Anderson Cooper. The question was, what is 12 years of forced labor like? So in this chapter, I have a small section titled, a very small section titled "Forced Labor." I talked about, the North Korean regime becoming dependent on forced labor, like the former Soviet Union, relying on these prisoners for various industries such as sawing, construction, mining, and North Korea has the largest political prisoner population in the world, estimated at 200,000 to 400,000. The largest of these camps are estimated to be the size of Washington, D.C. Just unbelievably huge political prisoners. You can go to prison for anything as minor as singing a South Korean pop song or sitting on a newspaper photo of Kim Jong-il accidentally. And North Korea practices something called collective punishment, whereby they'll send 3 generations of a family to prison for the crime, the quote-unquote crimes of one person. So you'll meet people in prison who are there because their grandchild or their grandparents, committed some type of offense. Here you see a picture of Mrs. Ju, one of the North Korean refugees within our shelters. And Missionary Lee, again from this church network, one of our Chinese staff, was her overseeing manager. And we were meeting one time along the border at his home. He lived along the border. He was a farmer. And we were meeting, and I was planning out Missionary Lee's next trip into North Korea to distribute humanitarian aid. Mrs. Ju, overheard us and said, "Oh my gosh, that village you're talking about is my hometown. I'd be happy to go with you and introduce you to some people, friends and family." And when we enthusiastically agreed. They crossed into North Korea, and when they got into the village, she turned in Missionary Lee saying he's a spy working for the U.S. government. Not true, but she embellished her story. Maybe she got paid more money. And we found out later that she was a refugee spy. Huge problem is North Korean, they're so cunning. They send North Korean spies posing as refugees to infiltrate networks. As a result, it's a huge problem that threatens to sabotage the work going on there at the border. Missionary Lee was in prison for 3 months, suffered horribly, nearly died, and we had to negotiate his release. Again, a subject of recent interviews. What's it like to negotiate the release of somebody? So I've been talking about negotiating the release of one of our Chinese staff. The North Korean government officials said to Missionary Lee, "We will release you if you help us with drug trafficking." And with our drug trafficking between the North Korean and China border, he refused, and they said, "We'll release you for an absurd ransom amount." And he said, "We don't have that kind of money," and it finally negotiated down to a smaller ransom amount, which we paid, and he was released, upon which he and I met, and he wrote a detailed report on his experiences there, which is, I think, largely the subject of this chapter, a big chunk of this chapter at least. So, my comment was, has been in the media recently, is I can only speak from my experience, and I don't have experience with diplomacy or, government-to-government relations, but I know the North Korean mindset, and, I really think when possible, they're wanting to negotiate, and they're thinking, what can I get for this? And they're trying to exploit situations, and I've come across that so many times in my 4 years at the border. I often partner with Link, a group. There's some thoughts on how you can get involved for people interested. An excellent organization that I do a lot of work with. And as far as the book, Escaping North Korea, I guess you have copies. I usually talk about how you can order it. There's my website where I do up-to-date, keep it up to date. Due to increasing pressure, created a Facebook page for the book under Escaping North Korea. I'll be around afterwards, happy to chat one-on-one. Again, looking forward to the dialogue during questions. And I guess in closing, I'll just read a final excerpt from my book. A question I often get is, how do you sum up your time at the border. Usually at this point, by this point of the conversation or my talk, my presentation, people think I'm some kind of nut. I'm pretty crazy. And I tell people, I once had a normal life before I went to the border, and I'm back to a normal life now. I just graduated about a month ago, finished my MBA at Georgetown. My plan is to start my own business. I've been doing business since I graduated college. I've always loved business, always loved nonprofit, working on import-export deals, and my plan is to devote half of my time to that, and then half of my time to nonprofit, of which a big chunk will be North Korea. And that's my plan. But it was just, these 4 years of my life where I said, I'm gonna take some risks, and I'm gonna help the North Koreans and do whatever it takes. And that's what I did. But it's always a complicated question when people ask me to sum up my thoughts on my time at the border. But this paragraph right here is the best I can sum it up, and I'll just read this in closing. Recently, I visited my friend Ed, who works for the U.S. Peace Corps in Fiji, for a few days of scuba diving. While we were diving, he updated me on his work and shared a quote by Lila Watson, an Australian Aboriginal woman. Apparently, it's a quote that every Peace Corps worker is exposed to early on in his or her 2-year service. It reads, "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." There's a lot of truth in that short statement. When I first set out for China, I was not only following a calling, but also doing something that I had to do because I knew it would change me forever. Even before I jumped on that plane to China, I knew that I would be deeply impacted by the people I met there, more than they would be by my work. In moving to the China-North Korea border to help some of the most destitute people in the world today, I feel that I have been liberated. As much as I have taught them, they have taught me more. In helping them, I have gained a greater sense of purpose and fulfillment. They have forever changed my life. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Yes.
Hey, thanks for the lovely talk. Not something we have very often here, but the topic of North Korea is always interesting. So I had two questions. One was from a work perspective, which is how do you find out information about crossing borders and stuff like that? I'm imagining Google doesn't do a good job. And the second was from a more human perspective. What do you feel about people in North Korea, and what's their mentality like? Do they feel defiant after they leave? Do they feel crushed? Just any views.
Sure. Yeah, great questions. Crossing Borders is a group that I started. The group was born largely out of a lot of fellow members of my church in Chicago. So if you do a search on Crossing Borders, you'll find more information on the work there. A lot of our work is helping refugees live safely in China, as I mentioned, or return to North Korea. We also have orphanages. We're helping sex trafficking victims as well. As far as the mentality.
I was thinking, how do you find out when you want to cross a border?
Oh, crossing the borders. Oh, how the refugees? Oh, you mean how do refugees cross?
Yeah, when you said you went into Laos and
Oh, that part. Yeah, the southern border. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. As far as going into from China into Laos, I received a tip from a former diplomat in China. He had done this type of work, and he said, here's the name of a city at the southern China border. Go there, and he said, go to the city along the border, ask a Chinese family to pay them about $12 US to feed you a meal, and just continue to do that and get a feel for these people. If you can trust them, and if you feel like you can, ask them to tell you how to get across the border illegally, because these villagers all know. And I was naive enough to be like, okay, I'll do that. And I flew down to southern China and started doing that by talking to local contacts. I went back and forth. It's really, I was detained multiple times. I was, interrogated. I played dumb, like, what? I'm in Laos now? I didn't know. I thought I was in China. It actually worked. And It's just a little bit insane, but I did that for just back and forth. I went over to the Laos side and used some of the tribal guys to be guides and help. I mean, I paid about $5 to guide from Laos to China for like a 4-hour hike. So unbelievable. The tribal guys are a different story. So that's how I did that. It all worked out in the end. It wasn't picture perfect plan. We were under house arrest for a couple of days in Laos during the project. As far as the mindset when they cross over, it's fascinating. Chapter 1, I talk about the North Korean mind, and you begin to learn what they think. The way North Koreans are, for example, children, the propaganda is unlike anywhere else in the world. Children are taught math from an early age. Well, first, North Koreans are taught to hate Americans. They're the number one enemy of North Korea. And from a young age, this is how children are taught math. If you throw one grenade and kill 2 Americans, and you throw another grenade and kill 3 Americans, how many Americans did you kill? So you can get an idea, begin to get an idea of the mindset, the propaganda. Another story I shared on CNN was a South Korean military person I interviewed, a North Korean military, and she's a refugee. She defected from the military, was in one of our shelters, and I started interviewing her about her military experience. And she said, when I was in the military, my job was on the north side of the DMZ, was to pick up pro-democracy literature being flown in on balloons into North Korea from South Korea. So there'll be balloons and there'll be pro-democracy literature on there. She said, my job was to pick them up with a stick. And I said, why did you use a stick? And her answer was, because they told me if I touched anything from South Korea, my hands would rot. And I said, you believe that at the time? And she said, yes, I did. And this is a grown 30-year-old woman. Unbelievable. So that gives you an idea of some of the mindset. Interestingly now, one of the strategies is on this pro-democracy literature is to use pictures of Kim Jong-il and write pro-democracy literature on them. And because when they get them, they can't throw it away because it's a crime to like throw away these pictures. So they're really confused. They can get in trouble for keeping it, and they can get in trouble for throwing it away. And so that's one of the strategies I hear some groups are involved in. But a big part of when they come out to China is we have them watch TV, Chinese TV, South Korean cable. They begin to learn the truth about the world. And if there's anyone's curious, I could share some of the transformations going on in North Korea, because refugees return and they tell stories to other North Koreans, and there's a lot of change going on in North Korea.
How do those refugees manage to cross Korean-Chinese border? Is it not fortified on the Korean side, barbed wire and guards and stuff? Is it possible to cross it?
Sure. It's not barbed wire. There's certain areas, but most of it was like the picture that I had showed you. It's wide open, and there are guards. It's not protected by Chinese guards. It's protected by North Korean guards, and you'll see underground little manholes where North Korean soldiers are hiding, and there are snipers, and they do shoot down North Koreans fleeing. I've heard you'll sometimes see bodies floating in the river of North Korean people gunned down, but there are North Korean soldiers. So they'll cross by finding an area in between those posts, because it's a long border. I forgot how many miles it is now. So they'll find spaces in between these North Korean border posts, or they'll pay a border patrol guard to cross. If they know somebody or if they can bribe them with enough money, they'll pay them. And when I was there, they were paying $25 to cross into China, $25 when they come back. So that was how they would cross into China.
And you mentioned several times that people came back. Why do they do it? If they escaped once, why do they go back?
Yeah, that's a great question. I noticed when I was living there at the border and helping North Koreans, I noticed a lot of them wanted to return, but I had no statistic, and it's very counterintuitive. And then I interviewed a UN person for my book, a UN representative, and he said, they have a statistic that says 50%, in their estimate, 50% of North Koreans in China return to North Korea. Shocking number. Then it made sense. I said, you know what? In my experience, that's what I've noticed. A lot of people want to return to North Korea, and they return because of family. So a lot of them have left family behind. Some of them are coming to make money and take it back to their family. Some of them are coming to make money and take it back to help a sick family member that's near death. And a lot of them, they just don't, well, they might not have the guts to make this journey into South Korea, into Seoul, or they might not be willing to make that risk. Or they decide in China, I'm not fully free here. It's a quasi-freedom, and I'm not happy here in China either. And so I'm going to return to North Korea. That's my home. That's where my family and friends are. I want to help my country change in the future. So that's a lot of times the mindset.
Yeah, I'm originally from the Soviet Union, and I know for sure that nobody who crossed Soviet border ever returned back.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've never heard someone share a perspective from there. It is fascinating. Yeah, it's hard to understand.
So I'm just curious, now that you've written the book, you're kind of in the limelight. Aren't you afraid that the North Korean government is going to send their spies or stuff, and you have a lot of information in your head? Aren't they going to hunt you down and imprison you or something?
Yeah, they. It's something I thought through when I wrote the book. One is, my time in China was coming to end. Chinese PSB had my footage, my picture. What else? North Koreans had a file on me from this informant. They sent it over to China saying, help us to find this guy, helping North Korean refugees. So after 4 years, we felt like, information on me was building. We thought it'd be best if I left, and then we brought in new people to do the field work. As far as the book, we talked it through. Is this a good idea? And in the end, the decision out of everybody I talked to was, hey, let's write this book and raise awareness. It'll be the first of its kind. A lot of books on North Korea, a lot of excellent books, but it'll be the first of its kind really in English with the testimony of the refugees, the story of the refugees. So we decided it'd be a good idea to write. As far as the risks, in China, best case scenario would be I'd be deported by Chinese authorities. Then the next level would be imprisoned in China. The worst case scenario is North Koreans have assassins that they send into China to assassinate people doing this work. There's some documented stories of them coming in and assassinating humanitarian aid workers helping North Koreans, or abducting them back into North Korea. So that was the biggest fear while I was there. Now that I'm outside of China, I feel much better. But still, there's some risk. North Koreans, have abducted people from Japan. It's just it's crazy. It's like a movie. And they take these little submarines and scooters with compartments, and they will go in and abduct people and put them into compartments in these scooters, take them back to land, submarine back to North Korea. They abducted a South Korean director and actress, two famous people in Hong Kong, because Kim Jong-un wanted to learn how to make movies. I'm like, can't you find a better way to learn how to make movies? He's a big movie fanatic, apparently, one of the largest DVD collections. So yeah, that is a concern, but not too much. There's other leaders, other people in doing this type of work that I'm doing, and nothing like that's happened outside of China to us yet. So I try not to think about it too much, but I don't think it's too much of a concern.
Okay, so just two quick questions. One, do you regret at all that you didn't get a chance to get some kind of tourist visa to North Korea before they build a file on you to kind of get firsthand look inside? And secondly, did you read any accounts from other people that actually were in some of the gulags and escaped as any kind of research? And if so, which ones did you find more interesting?
What was the first question? I'm drawing a blank on.
Getting a visitor's visa.
Oh, visitor visa. Yeah, so I did go to North Korea once for 3 days. I went in to explore some. I was there as a business guy, exploring some business opportunities. I was looking at seafood exports from the northern part of North Korea. I did that for 3 days, so I did get a firsthand look, and I mean that was a whole another experience. Going in there and being exposed to the propaganda and seeing what it's like to be there. Of course, I didn't get a real look at North Korea. They wouldn't let me. They had 3 people with me the whole time I was there, following me around like minders. So yeah, I'm very glad I did get a chance to. And I got invited back again later on, but decided not to go back because my work in China was growing, and they did have that file on me later on. It was shortly after my visit that they had that file on me. Even though they didn't have my name or picture, I just didn't feel comfortable starting to go back into North Korea. So I do regret that. I never visited Pyongyang. I was in northern part, and that there's a lot of my friends that are going into North Korea and doing a different type of work by being there as business people. One guy from Silicon Valley here, actually, a Korean American living there since 1999, doing business. I was shocked. And he's been living there since 1999 doing business. So, I envy these guys that got to do that, but I got to do a different type of work at the China-North Korea border. As far as gulags, I have a chapter on it. My chapter is not by any means the best work on it. David Hawk wrote something called The Hidden Gulags, which I reference, and he put together, he's a researcher, he's a real writer, I'm not, and he put together this report on a really comprehensive report on the gulags. But I did interview people and ask them, tell me about your experience in the prisons, prison camp survivors, some unbelievable stories of people surviving the prisons, and I did document that in my chapter on the gulags.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. It's great. What are your kind of thoughts on the long-term prospect of North Korea? I mean, right now I think there's some secession kind of issues with Kim Jong-un and his sons, and if you look at history of, let's say, Cuba with Fidel Castro kind of going off the scene, maybe there's more liberalization. So do you kind of long-term see that possible in North Korea, or do you really see them as being able to so tightly control the society that this model, could persist for many, many years to come?
Yeah, I'm not a policy or government expert. My expertise comes from living at the border, spending a lot of time with North Koreans, but from my observation of North Korea, I'd love to see like a China-Vietnam model, gradual opening, of course, rather than complete collapse and chaos and chaos or a war. Of course, I'd love to see China-Vietnam model with gradual opening up and information and getting into the country, and we're seeing that happen. I don't think North Korea can continue to hold on. They've showed their resilience over the years. I mean, the regime is very resilient, and it's the last, really the state of its kind. But I don't think they can continue because every year more information is getting into the country through cell phones, illegal cell phones, through refugees. My book, that's one of the main things I talk about is the refugee flow point of it, because so many refugees are going into China. If 50% of them are returning to North Korea, they're changed, and they don't buy into the model anymore. And they're returning to North Korea. Then they're telling trusted family, friends of stories going on. And here's one story to illustrate, a bit comical story to illustrate it. I recently interviewed a diplomat from a certain country who was stationed in Pyongyang for 2 years. And I interviewed him about maybe a month and a half ago. And he had just returned after his 2-year post in Pyongyang. And he and his wife, I was meeting with the both of them for coffee in the morning, and they told me a story. They said, Mike, North Korea is changing. Pyongyang is changing. And it's coming from firsthand knowledge. And they said, right before we left, a North Korean woman approached us, in secret and said, I've been really wanting to learn English. And I was hoping that you could get me a DVD set of Desperate Housewives. And I was blown away. And their response was, I'm not sure if that's the best English that you should be should be learning. But I was like, no way, that's unbelievable. And you hear about these South Korean dramas going in and out, and the country changing. And I think that, of course, this is like a small experience. It's not representative of the whole country, but definitely it's changing. And stories like that I'm hearing more and more of, and I'm optimistic that the country is changing. I don't think the government can continue to hold on, which could explain their aggressive policy change lately. They feel threatened. The food shortage is getting again to an all-time low. Information is getting out of in and out of the country. More and more North Koreans are not buying into the model. More the military even. The military, I interview some military people. Even the military doesn't have enough food. Military people are not happy. I've interviewed soldiers who said, if we get into war with America, that's the propaganda. It's all war with America. So if we fight America, I'm firing on my own soldiers or my own officers first. And so there's a lot of unrest in the country, and maybe that's why there's all this aggressive nuclear missile tests and detaining journalists, these kind of things happening.
Great. So I just want to thank Mike for coming today to speak to us. And Mike will be available to sign books after the talk and answer any questions that you guys might have. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.